So here's a paradox for you. There are 180 different countries in the world, all with different national interests that conflict with one another. There are 5 major religions in the world that each have their own, religious interpretation of what the truth is, what right and wrong is, that conflict with one another. And yet the world is a pretty peaceful place right now, right? We don't have any major wars going on. There hasn't been a huge international conflict since 1945. How is it that people can believe all these different things and have all these different ideas, and yet the world is peaceful? You might say that, it's because of the United Nations. All these different countries, when they have a problem with one another, instead of fighting over it, they talk it out. And that's somewhat true, but also a lot of countries don't really respect the United Nations. The problem is that a lot of countries view things like the United Nations as the United States' attempt to, swing its might around, and they don't view them as legitimate. They're like, why should we do what they say? That means different countries in different parts of the world have different ideas about what the rules are that govern international affairs, right? There's not one universal set of rules that everybody agrees upon. For example, there are still tons of fundamentalist Muslims in the Middle East who are like, the role of Islam is to, convert all the infidels by force. We're going to militarily crush them and defeat them and then convert them. Their idea of world order has nothing to do with the United Nations. Their idea of world order comes from the Quran and from the days of the Prophet Muhammad and the Islamic Caliphate, where, all these conquering bands of invaders and marauders would go around and bring as much territory under Islam as possible, and their mission was to convert everybody in the whole world. And their idea of world order is everybody's Muslim, everybody is part of the same brotherhood, and so we can all be at peace with one another, but we can't have peace until everybody is Muslim. In other parts of the world, like for example in Asia, they're happy to abide by national boundaries and not meddle in other countries' affairs, but they get kind of upset when we meddle in their affairs, right? Like when we try to shove our human rights message down their throats. That doesn't make them so happy. So how is it that all these different people have all these different conflicting ideas, all these different conflicting national interests, and yet they're not constantly going to war with one another? Well, according to Henry Kissinger, it's because we have a balance of power in the world right now, and it's a good balance of power that disincentivizes war. In his book World Order, Henry Kissinger talks about how to get that kind of world peace and what that world peace looks like today. There are basically 2 ways to create a peaceful international system. And the first is you have some power in your region that's so powerful that A, any war you start with them, you're just going to lose. And B, if 2 countries that are totally unaffiliated with that country have a war, that country can pick the winner by supporting it. And so it gets whatever it wants. It basically acts as a global policeman, and you can't do anything to stop it. That's the way that peace usually happens in most parts of the world, right? So for example, in ancient Asia, China was so powerful that, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, they didn't have to do exactly what China wanted, but if they really pissed off China, they were going to get their asses kicked. Same thing in the Middle East, where the Islamic Caliphate controlled basically everything, and if you were going to try and fight them, you were going to lose. That used to be how things worked in Europe too, right? During the days of the Roman Empire controlled basically everything, and if you were a Carthaginian and you hated Rome and you wanted to destroy Rome, well, guess what? You were just going to get Carthage destroyed, right? The Romans were going to get so mad at you that they razed your city. But after the Roman Empire collapsed, it didn't work that way anymore, right? Instead of one power dominating everything, there were lots of little fragmented states here and there, and none of them were really more powerful than all the others. And so they were going to war all the time. And so how did they figure out how to prevent war? Well, they came up with a pretty elegant solution. Their solution was to have a bunch of different centers of power that would ally with one another so that nobody would ever completely win a war and nobody would ever completely lose a war, right? So if France and the Ottoman Empire and Sweden allied with one another, then they were strong enough to defeat Spain and Britain and Austria. From the time the Roman Empire collapsed up until about 1945, that's the way Europe worked, and they had a bunch of wars, but they would have had way more if they hadn't figured that out. So you can either get peace by having one great big power, the Pax Romana style peace, or having many small powers, the Westphalia style peace. Now Henry Kissinger's big point is that none of these systems are really about what's moral or what's right, or following the rules, or etc., etc. It's really just about power, right? Basically, the system works if nobody's incentivized to start a war, and if somebody does start a war, they get their ass kicked. In 1968, all the leaders and statesmen in Europe were like, we're sick of the 30 Years' War, we don't want this war to be going on any longer, so let's meet and agree to a new international system. And basically what they agreed to is they agreed that there would be borders in Europe, right? Like, this piece of land belongs to France, this piece of land belongs to Spain, this piece of land belongs to Britain, etc., etc. And we use that system today for every single country, right? Like, every single country has defined borders. This is where it starts, this is where it ends. Sometimes there are disputes over where the borders are, but for the most part, people agree that there are borders. Henry Kissinger's big thing is that, now that we have this Westphalian system working, now that, we're not fighting each other, we agree about whose land is whose, then really it's all about preserving that system. So how do we preserve the system? Well, in the back part of the book, Kissinger talks about two American presidents, Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson, and compares their approaches to foreign policy. Woodrow Wilson was super idealistic. He founded the League of Nations because he was like, all these countries need to cooperate and we need to move towards a world where there's no war. Whereas Teddy Roosevelt was mostly about like, okay, let's make sure that these Europeans don't get all powerful, don't get all high and mighty so that they don't mess with us. Kissinger doesn't like Woodrow Wilson's approach. He thinks it causes a lot of problems when you meddle in other countries' affairs. In fact, Kissinger says that the whole reason why World War I and World War II happened was because European statesmen and Woodrow Wilson and all these other people forgot how important it is to strike a good balance of power, right? When they were, signing the Treaty of Versailles, saying like, we're going to punish Germany, they had forgotten that, like, in the past in European history, punitive pieces where you punish the country that lost the war don't really lead to a stable world order. When you're crafting a peace treaty, you shouldn't really think about like, what's the right thing to do, or what moral principles should we uphold, or whose fault is this, or who deserves to be punished. You really want to just think about like, okay, how do we prevent another war from happening? Kissinger says that peace only works if A, everybody buys into it, or B, everybody who doesn't buy into it doesn't have enough power to do anything about it. Basically, you can have an idealistic foreign policy where you try and reshape the world in your image, or you can have a realistic foreign policy where you just don't really care about what other countries are doing and you just protect your national interests. Kissinger's about as realistic as they come. When he was Secretary of State, he got really frustrated with Americans saying like, we need to take on the Soviets, we need to, show them who's boss. It's like, no, we can just work to achieve a equilibrium here where neither of us is attacking each other. And instead of trying to shove our ideas down their throats, we can just do the smart thing so that we don't get nuked. Otto von Bismarck said that power should not be restrained by principle, and Kissinger would agree. Now, is that taking it too far? Maybe. I would argue that if we didn't care about moral principles at all and we didn't pay attention to them at all, then the world would kind of be terrible right now. And moral progress is possible throughout history, right? Like, the world today is way, way more fair and just than the world of 2,000 years ago. But at the same time, if we get too high and mighty and we focus too much on moral principles and not enough on reality, then everything can fall apart, which is exactly what happened during World War II. So thanks for checking out Theo's Book Club. If you're new around here, my name's Theo. I make short videos like this one going over the big ideas in the books that I read so that you can learn all the stuff that I learned, and so you can decide, do I want to read these books for myself? If you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll go down and leave a thumbs up. That tells YouTube, hey, this is a good video, I liked it, you should show it to more people, and they will show it to more people. Also, if you want more of these book review videos to pop up in your feed, you can subscribe. You can either click right down there, or you can click that button right there. If Henry Kissinger is a subject that greatly interests you, you can also watch this video right here. It's the video I made about Walter Isaacson's biography of Henry Kissinger. It's pretty good. You should check it out. And until next time, don't get too high and mighty, and have a great day.